Today, opposing the demographic decimation of native Europeans in their historic homelands is not a matter of bigotry or merely aesthetic preference. It's one of the great meta-political causes of our age. And it certainly doesn't imply hating anybody, but it marks the choice of order over entropy, continuity over confusion, the integrity of distinct forms, including human communities, over the rapacious exercise of power that views us all as brute resources and cares nothing for local culture and character. Any moral authority that facilitates the destruction of Europe is therefore false, whether state, media, intelligentsia, or pope. Spain has recently changed the status of 500,000 undocumented migrants, also extending legal status potentially to their families, so that the number we're looking at could be upwards of 1 million in the country, and the motivation is explicitly to hurt the far right. This comes as a particularly obvious example of the decades-long policy of replacing the local population with migrants.
Ojalá, teoría del reemplazo, ojalá podamos barrer de fachas y de racistas este país con gente migrante. Claro que yo quiero que haya reemplazo de fachas.
Da sterben mehr Deutsche als geboren werden. Das liegt zum Glück daran, dass die Nazis sich auch nicht besonders vervielfältigen. Und schon deshalb sind wir auf Zuwanderer aus anderen Ländern angewiesen.
De la capacité de nos listes à incarner la nouvelle France, celle du grand remplacement.
And the principles at stake in today's crisis have long been known. They're at the inception of the Western tradition. Indeed, it's often ignored that Plato's political project required the preservation of ethnic identity as the basis for articulating governing institutions. He contrasts this to the tyrannical yoke under which diverse nations become jumbled together and lose their character. Quote, "Had not the bondage that threatened Hellas been warded off by the concerted effort of the Athenians and Lacedaemonians, the Spartans, practically all of the Greek races would have by now been confused together, and barbarians confused with Greeks and Greeks with barbarians, just as the races under the Persian Empire today are either scattered abroad or jumbled together and live in a miserable plight." End quote. The Hellenic alliances Plato praises in the Laws, his final work and last word, are basically a corrected version of the oppressive Persian Empire, attempting to match its might and magnitude, benefiting from pooled resources, economies of scale, but without the loss of its constituent identities. The parallels to our situation are obvious enough, and it's suggestive that Plato precisely, almost prophetically, invokes common cause with the rest of Europe, a continent whose vast sprawl was roughly known to the Greeks. Herodotus had already detailed it. Plato speaks of the Persians making their attack on Hellas, or speaking more correctly on the people of the whole continent of Europe. End quote. The Persian attempt on Greece has seen several historical recurrences: the Carthaginian designs on Rome, the Moorish assault on our west, the Ottoman siege on our east, and indeed the current overwhelming of the continent. The history of the Mediterranean has often been one of shore against shore, as Virgil wrote. Frequently, we realize ourselves in competition with the other, in contrast to the other, and that doesn't mean we should hate anybody. To the contrary. In fact, in our tradition, we often praise the enemy. Aeschylus praises the Persians while opposing their conquests. The Romans grudgingly celebrated Hannibal, and plenty of great European thinkers have found a lot to admire in Islamic civilization. Of course, the contemporary crisis goes quite a bit further than a clash of two clearly delineated civilizations. Today we have a myriad of conquered peoples, economically subordinated peoples, from every corner of the earth getting marshaled up to wherever the money power may want them, mainly the global north. As in Plato's telling, to be solved, our problems require unity, but that unity that we do have is precisely our problem. The international institutions we have, the European Union, are pushing what's happening to us. Europeans have long been reeling under the equivalent of Plato's foreign despot, whose project was to merge every subject people into a single laboring mass. The tyrant has already conquered. It's our own ruling class, and opposing it is ultimately good for Europeans as well as non-European peoples. Eric Voegelin, the political philosopher and luminary, who I'm a big fan of, renders Plato's view as follows, quote, "Plato insists that a intellectually and spiritually satisfactory order is possible only if the unit in question is indeed culturally an ethnos, and not a jumble of former peoples held together by a conquering power, as in the Persian case. The population of a multi-civilizational ecumenic empire is not an ethnos that could organize itself as a federation of paradigmatic states." In the Platonic conception, then, such units would require a political organization for the two purposes of securing peace within the ethnos and defense against organized units of a comparable size. End quote. This would be the basis for a united Europe. The alternative is a nearly certain rise in criminality and civil discord, an atomized, chaotic society that's easy to control by the powers that be, even apart from the terrible erosion of that distinctness, that particular character of our people, and ultimately of all people. The reason why it's preferable that humanity should consist of ethnically distinct peoples is that a transcendent unity, to be properly understood, has to manifest through the harmony of contrasting forms, different manifestations of itself, rather than the uniformity of every form in a globalized mass. Life has to seal itself off from the elements, enclose itself in skin or scales or bark, and a genus has to manifest in many bodies that each bear its image. The human form would be nowhere found if every person were in an obscene continuity with every other, like a vast fungal mass of writhing tissue, a worldwide skin-wrapped sea of blood. The beauty of the human form has to manifest through particular features and be perfected, or fail to be so, in each person. And the same is true of human cultures, of the way we do things collectively. Any stable human settlement develops into an ethnos where the emergence of a local character, from a local language to physical features, is the mark of stability in time and intensity of interaction between persons within a given area. Therefore, the forces of the lust for domination, the libido dominandi, will tend to present as a false universal. They're going to deploy the language of anti-racism. They're going to marshal xenophilia, love of the outsider, and endophobia, hatred of that which is local. The opposite evil, particularism that goes too far to this kind of cosmopolitan entropy, will claim that centrality owed to transcendent principles belongs to a certain group, unifying humanity in subordination to that group and turning that group into an idol. One is the whore of Babylon, you could say, the other one is the beast in the apocalypse. But the result is the same. The Western tradition, and all tradition ultimately, is anchored in the defense of the particular as icon of, not impediment to, the universal. Our struggle is a philosophical one and therefore a very practical one. And in terms of practicality, I want to highlight the remigration proposal that Martin Sellner has come up with. He doesn't break with our present legal definition of citizenship, and he does not propose coercive remigration, but a series of policies to try to reverse the effects of mass migration into Europe. If adopted and carried through in the long term, this is, I think, the best way, from a practical standpoint, that I've seen to avoid future conflict and to resist the entropic, particularity-destroying, ethnocidal agenda of the political class. This is my understanding of Sellner's proposal. I've interviewed him and we'll put that out, by the way. Sellner talks about stopping mass migration and stopping mass naturalization. You bring illegals home, and those who are already legally here, you don't naturalize. You make citizenship laws a lot more stringent than they are, as in Dubai, for example. And those who are legally here but not naturalized, you deport, beginning with those who have a criminal record and who are a financial burden. You cut financial aid and state help, specifically in those areas which are principally benefiting persons of a migrant background, to encourage the legal migrants to leave, but also to encourage those who are already naturalized but are making use of those programs to think about making their home elsewhere. And then you offer financial aid to leave, because you create programs with a financial incentive and other incentives, perhaps, for people to go to certain countries, those countries from which the majority of your migrants originate. So that's available to all citizens, but obviously will be made more use of by those who have some tie to a foreign country with which you come to some arrangement, and they would benefit from people coming back with a lump sum anyway. At the same time, you create all sorts of laws that make it difficult for parallel societies to retain their character, like ghetto laws in Denmark. The cultural tide turns against them, and they're incentivized to leave. Sellner emphasizes that you should not deport naturalized citizens, because if you reject the principle of equality before the law for all citizens, your political opponents could walk through the same door and take your citizenship away for being an extremist or whatever reason they come up with. But you implement implement a battery of measures that encourage remigration. You also potentially set up charter cities in other countries to absorb some of the migrant flow that would have come to Europe because you set up manufacturing plants there, something. It also gives you a first port, so to speak, to which to send illegals. And you have to consider remigration as a 30-year-long project, not an immediate fix. Obviously, I support state incentivizing family formation policies to raise the birth rate, home ownership, land ownership, not least because I think that if your family has contributed to a country over the generations, you are de facto a shareholder and ought to own a piece of that country. But the problem is that those kinds of policies would be equally available to naturalized citizens of foreign origin as they are to indigenous Europeans. Having said that, if you implemented those sorts of policies at the same time as you're implementing all of the pro-remigration measures, you might still get the desired effect because there's also a financial incentive for people to leave. And those people who leave are going to be those who have a tie with the country to which you are offering them travel. An Algerian origin French citizen will not necessarily want to partake in state aid to buy land in France if it's comparable to what he would get for going back to Algeria, where anyway he has more purchasing power. So that makes sense, but it has to be parsed very carefully so you don't end up with the opposite of what you're looking for. And in my view, this is not what Sellner argues, at some point down the line you should consider the argument about generational investment in a country making the indigenous, the native, the ancestral European, or whatever else, because this applies to any group of people wanting to preserve themselves, a more legitimate co-owner of the country than folks who have arrived recently from abroad. You owe the native something, and in the long term, you might define citizenship in Europe in part on the basis of ancestry. This also is based on the principle that the world should consist of distinct peoples. That's a legitimate philosophical premise from which to make policy. Okay, as always, thank you very much for watching. Do subscribe if you would like to. Join me on Substack. You can become a paid member of Substack. Join me on Twitter. Buy me a coffee. Thank you very much, and until next time.